You gave coffee to that guy with the dog, and you did it right in front of the inspector. Her boss didn't yell. He snapped. Cold. Final. No room for mercy. You're out, Maddie. Pack your things. You're done here. 6 years of loyalty. Gone in seconds. She didn't argue, didn't cry. She just untied her apron with hands that shook and walked out. Not because she broke the rule, but because she stood up for a veteran with a service dog. What Maddie didn't know was that someone had filmed the entire thing. And less than an hour later, 4 military Humvees rolled into the parking lot. Could one act of kindness turn the tide? Leading them was a Marine colonel, a man who once owed his life to that very same veteran. And from that moment on, everything began to change forever. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. My name is Lena Myers, and I've worked at Freedom Grounds Cafe in Rockford, North Carolina for 2 years. I'm the morning barista, usually in at 5 a.m. and off by 10 o'clock. It's a small town with a big Marine presence. We're just 15 minutes from Camp Barron, one of the largest Marine Corps training facilities on the East Coast. Everyone around here knows a service member. Most people are service members or related to one. That's why Freedom Grounds was special. Not because of the coffee, but because of her. Maddie wasn't just our manager. She was the heart of the place. She remembered names, kids' birthdays, deployments. She had this old notebook she kept behind the register filled with little details. Mr. Collins likes extra cinnamon on top. Or Mrs. You lost her son last winter. Ask how she's holding up. She ran Veterans Coffee Hour every Wednesday, and she made sure any vet with a service dog never had to explain anything because she got it. Her dad was a Marine, retired now, but he'd come in with his buddies on Wednesdays and tell stories over black coffee and breakfast muffins. Maddie always said this place kept him alive. I just want to pay that forward. And then came that morning. It was just after 9, a chilly Wednesday. The kind of morning where steam rose off hot coffee cups like ghosts. James Walker came in with his German Shepherd, Duke, tall guy, quiet, always sat near the window. Didn't talk much, but Duke never left his side. Wore his red vest. Service dog. Do not pet stitched in bold white letters. Maddie was behind the bar. I was on espresso. She smiled at James and waved. That's when he walked in. Kyle Benson, the new district health inspector. I'd only seen him once before, but that was enough. He had the look of someone who liked shutting people down. Neatly pressed suit, clipboard tucked tight under his arm like it was a weapon. He glanced around, eyes scanning like radar, and then they landed on Duke. He froze. This is a violation, he said, loud enough for the whole cafe to hear. James' hand trembled on his coffee cup. Maddie walked over, calm and composed. Sir, he's a registered service dog. ADA law protects his right to be here. Benson's face went red. I don't care what kind of dog it is. You're serving food. It's unsanitary. It's federal law. Maddie replied, still calm. You can't just ignore that. I can do whatever I want, he snapped. This cafe will be cited and shut down unless that animal is removed. Now. James stood startled. Duke pressed tighter to his leg, sensing the shift. The whole room went still. You could hear the hiss of the milk frother and nothing else. Then Maddie said something I'll never forget. I won't throw out a veteran and his service dog to make you comfortable, sir. That was it. In front of everyone, customers, staff, even old Mr. Delaney, who's nearly deaf, the regional manager, Susan Hanley, who just happened to be there for a routine visit, stormed up and snapped. You're fired, Maddie. Clear out your locker now. Gasps, silence. Maddie didn't argue, didn't cry. She just took off her apron, walked past me, and whispered, make sure James gets his coffee, okay? She left out the side door. Her dad hadn't even arrived for Veterans Coffee Hour yet. I just stood there and honestly I didn't know what to do, but the Marines did. But what would happen next in this tense standoff? 35 minutes later, I was wiping down the bar when I heard it. A low, steady rumble. At first, I thought it was thunder, but then the sound grew deeper. Boots hitting pavement, tires rolling slow. The windows started to vibrate. I looked outside. My jaw hit the floor. 4 military Humvees pulled into the lot and behind them dozens of men and women in uniform. Not just anyone. Colonel Adam Rutled, base commander of Camp Barron. He stepped out first, his face unreadable. His eyes swept the cafe, then locked on me through the window. I could barely breathe. The doors opened, and just like that, everything changed. The bell above the door jingled, but no one inside the cafe moved. We all just stood there frozen as the Marines walked in. Boots striking the tile like a silent countdown. There were maybe 20 of them, each one in full dress blues. Medals, ribbons, creases sharp enough to cut glass. And in the middle of them, Colonel Rutled. He wasn't especially tall, not loud, but the room shifted when he entered, like gravity pulled harder around him. You could feel it in your bones. I'd seen him before in town events, parades, fundraisers, but never like this. Never with that look in his eye. He walked straight up to the register. "Is James Walker here?" His voice was low, steady, like the calm before a thunderstorm. James stood slowly from the corner booth, Duke rising with him. His hands trembled slightly, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." Colonel Rutled turned to him. And what happened next, I'll never forget. He raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute. James froze. Then, just barely, he returned it. Every Marine in the cafe followed suit. The entire room saluted one man. Customers stood in silence. Even Mr. Benson, the inspector, went pale. His clipboard dipped slightly in his hands. Colonel Rutled held the salute, then dropped his hand and turned toward him. "You must be Mr. Benson," he said coolly. "I've reviewed your report from this morning." Benson stuttered. I didn't know he was." "You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic respect." The colonel's voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. Benson swallowed hard. Then Colonel Rutled turned his gaze to Susan Hanley, the regional manager who had fired Maddie not even an hour earlier. "I'm told your company has a policy of zero tolerance for staff who defy health codes," he said. "But I wonder, do you have a policy for when your staff upholds federal law and defends a decorated veteran?" Susan shifted her weight. "Colonel, I wasn't aware you were there." He cut her off. "You watched it happen and you fired her anyway." That's when Maddie's dad walked in. He didn't even take off his coat. He stopped cold at the sight of all the uniforms, then spotted Colonel Rutled and froze. "Colonel," he said, stunned. Rutled smiled and walked over. "Good to see you again, Sergeant Crane." They shook hands like old war buddies. Maddie's dad looked around confused. "What? What's going on here?" "We're here for your daughter." That line hit everyone like a shockwave. Meanwhile, I stepped into the back where Maddie had been packing up her things. She was sitting on the bench staring at her name tag. "You still here?" she asked, not turning around. "There's someone who wants to talk to you," I said. She sighed. "If it's Susan, she can save her apology." "It's not Susan." Then I opened the door and the colonel stepped in. Maddie stood instantly brushing muffin crumbs off her lap like she was reporting for duty. "Miss Crane," he said gently. "I wanted to speak with you personally." She blinked. Sir, I've been following your work here for some time. Veterans Coffee Hour, Service Dog Support. You've created a community that rivals what we have on base. You didn't just serve coffee. You served us." She swallowed hard. "I was just doing what felt right. That's why I'm offering you a job." She stared at him, stunned. "I'm starting a new veteran outreach program at Camp Barron. We need someone who understands not just policy, but people. Someone who cares enough to stand up when it counts. Maddie's mouth fell open. She looked at me. I nodded. You'd be perfect, I said. She turned back to him. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he smiled. Out front, word was spreading. People had started gathering outside the cafe, watching the military vehicles and snapping photos. A couple of local reporters showed up. Someone went live on Facebook. The story was out, but the Marines weren't done yet. But how would this act of bravery reshape Maddie's future? Colonel Rutled turned to the remaining customers. If anyone here witnessed what happened this morning, I encourage you to submit statements. We're pursuing this with the state attorney. That's when James stepped forward. His voice was soft but clear. She saved me, he said. That woman, Maddie, she didn't just serve coffee. She gave me a place I could breathe. A place where no one looked at me like I was broken. She let me be human again. Duke nudged his leg and sat beside him. The colonel nodded solemnly. That moment, I'll never forget it. 2 hours later, the cafe closed early. Maddie left with Colonel Rutled, heading to Camp Barron for a tour of her potential new job. Susan Hanley was pulled into a private meeting with corporate, and Mr. Benson was escorted off the premises by a uniformed officer. By sunset, the entire town had heard what happened. And by morning, the photo of Maddie standing outside the cafe beside Colonel Rutled had gone viral. But none of that compared to what she found waiting the next day in a manila envelope sitting quietly on the porch of her apartment. Inside was a handwritten letter and a silver star. James had never told anyone he had earned it. But now he was giving it to her for courage. He wrote, because you showed me what it looks like. When Maddie stepped out of the Jeep at Camp Barron, something in the air changed. It wasn't the size of the base or the organized chaos of troops jogging past in drills echoing in the distance. It was the way every Marine who passed her seemed to know her. Some nodded, others gave a polite, respectful ma'am. And a few even smiled like they recognized her face from somewhere because they had. The video of her standing firm in that cafe had been watched by thousands in less than 24 hours. By the time she arrived on base, Maddie Crane had become a symbol. A barista who stood up when others stayed silent. Colonel Rutled walked beside her, his stride calm and measured. You've made quite an impression, he said. I didn't mean to, she replied, eyes wide as they passed a group of recruits standing at attention. That's why it worked, he said simply. They entered the headquarters building in tall glass doors flanked by 2 flags waving in the afternoon breeze. Inside, everything was clean, sharp, and humming with quiet urgency. Maddie followed the colonel into a conference room overlooking the parade field. A file sat waiting on the table. Have a seat? She obeyed, still not quite believing any of this was real. I want to be transparent with you, he said, sitting opposite her. This isn't a ceremonial title. The position I'm offering you will have weight. You'd be responsible for 3 major programs: Veteran Transition Assistance, Community Mental Health Outreach, and the Service Dog Partnership Initiative. Maddie blinked. That's a lot. You've already done most of it on your own, he said, nodding to the file. We've kept an eye on Freedom Grounds, especially Veterans Coffee Hour. That little event grew into one of the strongest peer support hubs in the county. He paused. I read a statement from James Walker this morning. It was honest, powerful. Maddie looked down. He's been through a lot. More than most know, the colonel said, his voice suddenly quieter. He opened the file and slid a document toward her. It was a redacted report, parts blacked out, but one section was still readable. Sergeant James Walker, Silver Star recipient, Operation Hunterfield, Kandahar Province, May 2009. Exfiltrated 3 wounded teammates under fire. Lost 3 fingers. Diagnosed PTSD Category 4. Cleared for civilian transition in 2012. Maddie read it twice. I had no idea. She whispered. He doesn't talk about it. Not even to us. She looked up. But he trusts Duke and he trusts you. That afternoon, Maddie toured the facility. She met with therapists, social workers, and a retired Navy corpsman who'd lost his leg and now ran the K-9 pairing division. The man, Chief Petty Officer Brian Stone, walked with a prosthetic and a cane carved with an eagle's talon wrapped around the handle. He smiled when he saw her. "You're the coffee lady," he said, shaking her hand. "Guilty. I've had vets talk more about your cafe than about their own families. You got something rare, Miss Crane. You listen. That matters more than degrees or titles." He introduced her to 3 veterans currently waiting to be paired with dogs. One of them, a young woman named Amberlou, barely 23, had burn scars down her neck and arms and hadn't spoken a word in 2 months. Until she saw Maddie. "I know you," Amber said quietly. "You're the girl from the video." Maddie knelt beside her. "I'm just a regular person who made some noise, but I'm really glad you're here." Amber looked at the German shepherd lying beside her cot. "Her name's Nova," she said. "They say she's mine. I don't know if I deserve her." "You do," Maddie said instantly. "You absolutely do." That night, back in her apartment, Maddie couldn't sleep. She sat on her couch, staring at the silver star James had left her. It rested in a simple velvet box. No note, no ceremony, just quiet weight. Her phone buzzed. It was Lena. "Lena Myers. The whole town's talking about you. Freedom Grounds is a mess without you. Maddie, you're managing just fine. Lena, not the same. You coming back?" Maddie didn't answer right away. She thought about everything she'd seen that day. The wounded, the hopeful, the ones who still carried invisible weight. And she thought about Amberlou, about James, about her father. She finally typed. "Maddie, I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." But not everyone was happy. Inside a dim office on the 2nd floor of the Regional Health Department building, Mr. Kyle Benson sat in front of a glowing computer screen. A half-empty cup of coffee beside him. He replayed the video again. The one where he barked at James. Where Maddie stood up. Where the colonel walked in. He muttered under his breath. "Made me look like a fool." A knock came at the door. He quickly closed the browser. "Come in." A man in a tailored gray suit stepped inside. He wasn't from the local office. He wore a gold pin on his lapel, a bald eagle gripping arrows. "I'm with Internal Affairs," the man said. "We need to have a word about your conduct." Kyle Benson's face drained of color. And just like that, the tables began to turn. James Walker hadn't meant to tell his story. He never liked speaking in front of people. Not before the war. Definitely not after. But when Wednesday rolled around again and the vets started gathering at Camp Barron's new outreach center, something in him shifted. Maddie was there setting out fresh coffee, wiping down the long wooden table, adjusting chairs just the way she used to back at Freedom Grounds. It wasn't a cafe, not anymore, but it felt like one, and that made the difference. The room was quiet that morning. 10 veterans sat in a loose circle, old faces and new ones, men and women, some young, some gray-haired. Amberlou sat with Nova at her feet. She hadn't spoken much in the last week, but she hadn't missed a session either. James came in last as usual. Duke padded beside him, steady as always. He didn't sit right away. He stood at the edge of the group, one hand on Duke's collar. "I don't know why I'm standing," he began. His voice was low, uncertain. "I've never talked about this out loud." Maddie looked up but didn't move. Just listened. James swallowed hard. It was 2009. Kandahar, Operation Hunter Field. We were out in the open when the convoy hit an IED. The Humvee behind us went up first. He paused. There were 3 guys inside. One was already gone. The other 2, they were screaming. The room held still. I ran in anyway. Caught shrapnel, burned my hands, lost 2 fingers. He looked down at his right hand, which was clenched into a fist. The 3rd guy, he was trapped. I pulled him out, and then everything went dark. No one said a word. James took a breath. When I woke up, they told me I'd earned a silver star, but they never told me how to live with what I saw or what I failed to do. Maddie stood then and walked over to refill the coffee pot. A quiet gesture that gave James a chance to breathe, but then he looked directly at her. 2 years ago, I couldn't walk into a room without flinching. Duke helped. But you, he nodded at her. You gave me a place to heal. You never asked questions. You just treated me like I mattered. Maddie's hands paused on the coffee pot handle. James sat down slowly, and for the first time, Amberlou reached across the table and touched his arm. Thank you, she whispered. Later that afternoon, Maddie sat in Colonel Rutled's office, the weight of the morning still clinging to her. He was on the phone with someone from Washington, pacing slowly by the window. His tone was clipped but calm. Yes, understood. No, she hasn't accepted yet. Yes, I'll speak with her again. He hung up and turned to Maddie. They want to offer you a national role, he said without preamble. She blinked. What kind of role? Director of Community Veteran Initiatives. It would mean travel, speaking engagements, building programs like this across the country. Maddie sat down slowly. And if I say no, you stay here. Keep doing what you're doing. We'll support either decision. She hesitated. I didn't sign up for any of this, she said. No, he replied. But you earned it. She stared at the photo on his desk, a black and white shot of young Rutled standing in muddy fatigues with 2 other Marines. Can I be honest? She asked. Please. I don't want to become a symbol. I just want to keep doing good work. Rutled nodded. Then maybe that's exactly what this country needs. That night, Maddie called her father. He didn't answer on the first ring, probably watching an old western with the volume too high. But he picked up eventually. Hey, kiddo, his warm voice said. You settling in? Sort of. She paused. Dad, did you ever feel like you were doing something bigger than yourself? He chuckled. Every damn time I put on that uniform. Maddie smiled. Even when it was hard, especially then. She swallowed. I've got a choice to make. I know you'll make the right one. And that was all he said. The next morning, the outreach center was packed. More vets than usual. Word had spread about Jane's story, and now new faces were showing up. A few had driven from 2 counties over. Some had never talked to anyone about their service before. Maddie stood in front of them all. She looked around the room, the old wooden floor, the folding chairs, the wall now lined with photos of veterans and their service dogs. And then she took a breath. I've been offered something big, she said. But honestly, nothing feels more important than this. The room was silent, so I'm staying. Applause broke out. Colonel Rutled, standing quietly in the back, smiled. She wasn't just their host anymore. She was their voice. And across town, in the office of Kyle Benson, a new report hit his desk. This one wasn't about cafe violations. It was about him. And it started with 5 damning words. Conduct unbecoming of a public officer. For the first time, he was under investigation. And the storm he started was just beginning to turn back on him. 3 weeks passed and Camp Barron's new outreach center was no longer just a pilot program. It was alive. Every Wednesday morning, cars lined up outside before sunrise. Veterans from 3 neighboring counties came with service dogs, walking sticks, wheelchairs, and silent burdens too heavy to name. Maddie called them morning warriors. Some only stayed for 10 minutes. Some talked for hours. Others just sat but kept coming back. One afternoon, Amberlou painted a sign and hung it near the coffee station. No rank here, just respect. It became the motto of the place. But just as things felt settled, the letter arrived, stamped with the seal of the Department of Defense. It was addressed directly to Colonel Rutled. He opened it slowly in his office, Maddie sitting across from him, sensing something wasn't right. "What is it?" she asked, his jaw tightened. "They're sending a review board," he said. 3 inspectors, civilian side. They want to evaluate compliance and standards across all veteran community programs. Is that normal? Not this soon, not this detailed, and not when it's targeted. Maddie frowned. Targeted how? Rutled leaned forward. I think someone's pushing this from inside the state office. Probably someone who wants to make us look bad. Maddie's heart sank. Kyle Benson. The colonel nodded. He still has friends in high places, but now he has something to lose. The review board arrived 4 days later. 2 men in suits, 1 woman with a tight bun and a colder smile. They introduced themselves without emotion, took notes constantly, and walked through the outreach center with quiet judgment. They inspected everything. Kitchen safety, therapy logs, dog kennels, even Maddie's coffee machine. One of them asked her, "What certifications do you hold to run a therapeutic support group?" She stared at him. "None, just kindness and consistency." He didn't smile. Word spread fast. By that evening, the outreach center felt more like a courtroom than a safe haven. Veterans arrived nervously, unsure whether to speak or stay quiet. A few were overheard muttering, "They're going to shut it down." James Walker sat silently in his usual spot, hand resting on Duke's head. He hadn't spoken since the reviewers arrived. But Maddie, she was done being silent. The next morning, she asked for a meeting with everyone, veterans, staff, volunteers, even the inspectors. The conference hall was full by 8 a.m. Maddie stood at the front wearing her usual outfit, jeans, boots, and a Support Those Who Serve t-shirt. "I know why you're here," she said calmly. "And I know what some people want you to find. But before you make up your mind, I want you to meet the people this program has helped." She turned. "James?" He looked up, surprised. "Will you speak again?" James stood slowly, walked to the front. The room went quiet. "I thought I didn't deserve help," he said. "But Maddie showed me I didn't need to earn it. I just needed to accept it." He gestured to Amber. She smiled for the first time here. Amber gave a small nod, eyes misty. Then one by one, others rose. An older vet with a cane. One by a young amputee with trembling hands. A Marine sergeant who admitted he hadn't spoken to his kids in 6 years until last week. They all stood, not shouting, not pleading, just standing. It was louder than any speech. That night, the lead inspector requested a private word with Maddie. She met him in Colonel Rutled's office where the colonel waited with arms crossed. The inspector cleared his throat. "We've reviewed every file, interviewed every participant. What we saw today was not a program. It was a community." Maddie stayed silent. "Miss Crane," he continued, "will be recommending this center as a national model. We've never seen anything like it." The relief hit her like a wave. Colonel Rutled smiled for the first time that day, but the inspector wasn't done. "One more thing," he said, handing her a folder. "You're being nominated for a civilian commendation for service to national veteran welfare." Maddie opened the folder. And stopped breathing. It was signed by the Secretary of Defense. The next morning, Maddie arrived early before anyone else. She stood in the quiet of the center, staring at the wall of photographs against them on. She reached up and pinned a new one in the center. James, Duke, Amber, and herself. Right below it, a brass plaque with just 5 words. "This place saved my life." Then someone stepped through the front door. She turned. It was Kyle Benson, but he wasn't in a suit. He wore civilian clothes, eyes sunken, shoulders sagged. Maddie didn't move. He walked up holding a thin envelope. "I resigned," he said quietly before they could fire me. She looked down at the envelope. "What's this?" He hesitated. "An apology written. And something else. It's from someone you helped a long time ago. A name you might remember." She opened it slowly. Inside was a photo. Her and a man in uniform years ago smiling in front of the cafe, and the note read, "Tell Maddie she saved me before I even knew I was lost." Tears welled in her eyes. She looked back up. Kyle Benson was already gone. But his damage would never be the last word, because what Maddie built was no longer hers alone. It belonged to every veteran who walked through those doors. And nothing, not politics, not revenge, not fear, could take that away. The invitation came in a navy blue envelope sealed with the Department of Defense crest. National Veterans Leadership Conference, Washington, D.C. It was addressed to Maddie Crane with a handwritten note at the bottom. "Your story has become our story. Will you come speak for all of us?" Colonel Rutled found her in the therapy room, kneeling beside a new veteran who had just been paired with his dog, a golden retriever named Hope. "Looks like you've got another mission," he said, holding out the envelope. Maddie read it slowly, then exhaled. She didn't want to go. Truth be told, she hated stages, hated attention. She was comfortable pouring coffee and remembering birthdays, not walking into grand auditoriums with cameras and generals. But it wasn't about her. Not anymore. And when Amberlou squeezed her hand and whispered, "You speak for all of us," Maddie understood. She had to go. The day of the conference arrived cold and gray, D.C. wrapped in a coat of mist and marble. Maddie stood at the foot of the Capitol, staring up at its columns, her speech folded tightly in her pocket. She wore a navy blazer over jeans. Nothing fancy, just enough to feel brave. Then a familiar voice behind her. "Need a ride, Miss Crane?" She turned. It was James Walker, dressed in full marine blues, polished to perfection. Duke trotted proudly beside him, tail wagging like he knew this was something big. "James," she breathed. He nodded. "The base assigned me as your escort." She laughed, half nerves, half awe. "You clean up nice," he smirked. "You're the one about to speak to the Pentagon." She sobered. "I'm not ready." "You are." They walked side by side through the security lines, past the press, into the echoing marble halls. Inside the main chamber, hundreds of service members, commanders, officials, and veteran advocates filled the seats. On stage, a podium with her name. Maddie's hands trembled. James leaned over. "Remember what you always said to me?" She looked at him. He smiled. "Just be human. That's enough." When Maddie stepped up to the microphone, the room quieted. She scanned the crowd and began. "I'm not a doctor. I'm not a general. I'm not anyone special, really." Pause. "I managed a small coffee shop near a Marine base. I knew every regular's order, and I kept a notebook behind the counter with notes like, 'Steve likes more cinnamon.' Or, 'Don't ask about deployments. Just offer a smile.' A few chuckles. But what I learned was this. Veterans don't need grand speeches. They don't need perfect policies. They need places where they're seen, remembered, and respected." She paused again, her throat tightened. "My father was a Marine. He came back different, quieter, more distant. I was just a kid. I didn't understand PTSD. I just thought he didn't love us anymore." Silence. "One night, I found him on the porch staring at nothing, holding his service pistol." Gasps. "I didn't say anything. I just sat with him." Hours passed. Then he put the gun down. He looked at me and said, "Thank you for not leaving." Tears slipped down her cheek. "So, no, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a soldier. I'm just someone who stayed, who made coffee, who listened." She looked straight into the crowd, "And I will never stop." Thunderous applause. Later that evening, Maddie stood alone outside the venue. The sun setting over the Potomac. She needed air. A shadow stepped beside her. It was an older man, white beard, wrinkled hands, dark eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. He smiled gently. "You don't remember me?" he said. She tilted her head. "Should I?" He pulled out a photo yellowed with time. her years younger, handing a sandwich to a disheveled man outside the cafe. "That was me," he said. "You gave me lunch every Wednesday for months." She gasped. "You were the one with the green beanie." He nodded. "I was homeless. Hadn't spoken to my daughter in 10 years. Didn't think I deserved a second chance." He paused. "I do now. And that's because of you." He pressed something into her hand. A pin. Old silver, shaped like an eagle's wing. "I wore this when I rejoined my family. It's yours now." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came, only tears. That night, back at her hotel, Maddie sat on the windowsill, pin in hand. For the first time in weeks, she felt quiet. Not empty, not overwhelmed. Just quiet. Somewhere deep in her chest, where sorrow used to live, something warm finally took root. Not pride, not power, just peace. The plane landed back in North Carolina just after noon. Maddie stepped off carrying nothing but her duffel bag, the silver eagle pin still fastened quietly to her blazer. She hadn't spoken much since the conference. Her phone had dozens of unread messages, news outlets, veteran groups, even an invite from the governor. But all she wanted was to go home. And by home, she didn't mean her apartment. She meant Freedom Grounds Cafe. The cafe looked the same. Same creaky door, same coffee-stained counter, same smell of cinnamon and toast. Lena stood behind the register, startled when Maddie walked in. "You're supposed to be famous now," she teased. "I'm just here for coffee." Maddie smiled. Lena poured a cup silently and slid it across the counter. Then she leaned in. "You saved this place, Maddie. After you left, it lost its soul." Maddie looked around. Photos still hung on the wall, but now there were new ones. Amber, James, Nova, veterans laughing, hugging. The cafe had changed because she had changed it. Later that afternoon, Maddie drove to her father's old fishing spot, a quiet bend in the woods by the lake. She brought two things, the pin and the silver star. The breeze rustled the trees gently as she sat by the water, placing both items on a flat stone. "Hey, Dad," she whispered. "I did it. I stood up. I stayed." She closed her eyes. "I finally understand why you used to just sit here. Sometimes silence is the best way to speak." She left the pin on the rock facing the water. The next week, Camp Barron held its annual Veterans Day ceremony, an event that usually drew modest crowds. This year, it was standing room only. The new outreach center had to set up extra chairs outside. Soldiers volunteered to shuttle elderly veterans in golf carts. A choir of military kids sang the anthem. At the center of the event stood a new statue. Not a soldier, not a general, but a woman holding a coffee cup kneeling beside a service dog. No name, just 5 engraved words. Kindness, courage, community, coffee, home. Maddie stood at the back, stunned. She hadn't approved it. She hadn't even known. Colonel Rutled stepped beside her. "We figured it was time to immortalize the real hero," he said. She choked back tears. "I didn't do anything special." He looked at her. "Exactly." As the event wrapped up, veterans and families placed flags around the base of the statue. Amberlo gave a short speech, her first public one. James and Duke posed for a photo with school children. And then, without prompting, dozens of people began lining up. Not to salute, not to cry, but to hug Maddie one by one, silently, thanking her the way words never could. That night, as the sun set behind Camp Barron, Maddie returned to the outreach center alone. The rooms were quiet, the air warm. Outside, a few veterans lingered, chatting near the fire pit. She stood before the wall of photos, now overflowing. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out one final item. A new picture. Her and her father back when she was a kid. Him in uniform. Her in pigtails, both holding a tiny American flag. She pinned it dead center, and beneath it she placed a handwritten note. "He served the country. I served the ones who came home." Then she turned off the lights and walked out into the evening, not alone, but surrounded by a legacy of quiet strength, of simple acts, of stories that would never be forgotten. And as the door closed behind her, the wind carried a whisper through the trees. Thank you, Maddie. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way. Often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.